The train shuddered to a halt in the Wisconsin cold, metal groaning against metal, and through the gaps in the boxcar walls came a blade of pale winter light that cut across Corporal Tanaka's face. He did not move. None of them moved. 37 men breathing in rhythm, shoulders pressed together, waiting for the doors to slide open and reveal what they had been promised. The end, dressed as cruelty. Tanaka's stomach had stopped hurting 2 days ago. That frightened him more than the hunger itself. When the body stops complaining, it means surrender is near. He had chewed bark on saipan. He had boiled his boot leather into soup on the transport ship. He had learned that hunger was a kind of madness, eating thought before it ate flesh. But the madness had taught him one truth. He would die in this boxcar or outside it, and either way the Americans would make sure it was ugly. The doors opened with a clatter. Snow glare flooded in. Tanaka blinked, lifting one hand to shield his eyes, and saw boots. Black boots, then legs, then rifles. Guards barking orders in that blunt, hammer-strike language. Someone shoved him from behind, not hard, just a hand between his shoulder blades, and he stumbled forward into the snow. The cold bit through his torn uniform. He had not felt cold in months. The Pacific had been all sweat and rot, and the wet heat that clung to a man's skin like shame. This was different. This was clean. It made his lungs ache. Around him, the other prisoners shuffled into loose lines. No one spoke. Speaking invited attention, and attention invited punishment. That was the logic they had carried with them across the ocean. The logic drilled into them since their first day in uniform. Capture is disgrace, and disgrace invites suffering. The Emperor's voice had echoed in their ears during training. Death before dishonor. The enemy will strip you, starve you, mock you until you beg for mercy you will never receive. Tanaka scanned the camp. Barbed wire, guard towers, rows of wooden barracks stretching into the distance, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked like a military base, orderly and cold. It did not look like a place designed to break men slowly, which was what he had expected. Perhaps that came later. Perhaps the breaking happened indoors, where no one could see. A Red Cross official stood near the gate, clipboard in hand, watching them with the blank efficiency of a man counting livestock. Tanaka had heard of the Red Cross. In training, they had been told it was a fiction, a propaganda tool the West used to pretend it followed rules. But here was a man in a Red Cross armband, standing in the snow, writing names. The intake process was mechanical. Delousing first. Tanaka stood naked in a freezing shed while a soldier sprayed him with powder that smelled like chemicals and dust. His uniform was taken away, burned in a drum outside. He watched the smoke rise and felt nothing. Then a medical exam, a doctor pressing cold fingers against his ribs, counting bones. The doctor's face showed no emotion, but his pen moved quickly across the clipboard. Malnutrition. Fracture, left wrist, poorly healed. Lice, possible TB. When the doctor handed him a small white pill, Tanaka stared at it. Vitamin, the interpreter said flatly. Swallow. Tanaka swallowed. The pill tasted like chalk. He did not understand why they would give medicine to a man they planned to kill. The barracks were heated. That was the first shock. Tanaka stepped inside and felt warmth push against his skin, and for a moment he forgot where he was. The bunks were narrow, stacked too high, but each had a wool blanket folded at the foot. Wool. Not torn canvas or rice sacks stitched together, but real wool. He touched it carefully, as though it might vanish. "Do not trust it," whispered the man on the bunk beside him. His name was Sergeant Fujimoto, older, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "They soften us first. Then comes the interrogation." Tanaka nodded, but he could not stop touching the blanket. That night, lying in the dark, he heard men weeping. Not loud, just soft, choked sounds that crept through the barracks like smoke. He did not know if they wept from relief or shame. Perhaps both. He stared at the ceiling beams and tried to remember his wife's face, but hunger had eaten that memory too. All he could recall was the shape of her hands folding rice paper into origami cranes. The bugle woke them at dawn. Tanaka had heard that sound 1,000 times in the Imperial Army, and for a moment, still half asleep, he thought he was back in Yokohama. Then he opened his eyes and saw the barracks walls, and memory returned like a fist. Roll call. They lined up in the snow, breath fogging in the air, while a guard shouted names from a list. Tanaka answered when his name was called, his voice barely a rasp. No one struck him. No one spat at his feet. The guard simply checked a box and moved on. After roll call came the announcement, "Breakfast in the mess hall." The prisoners exchanged glances. Fujimoto muttered under his breath, "Here it comes. Scraps. Rotten food. They will laugh while we eat." But when the doors to the mess hall opened, the smell hit them first. It was thick, fatty, rich meat and salt, and something sweet underneath, something Tanaka had no name for. His stomach clenched so hard he almost doubled over. Around him, men froze, nostrils flaring, eyes wide. One prisoner made a small, involuntary sound, like a dog catching scent of food. The line moved slowly. Tanaka clutched his tin tray and waited, heart hammering. When he reached the front, an American cook sleeves rolled. Faceboard dropped something onto the tray with a metal spatula. Tanaka stared. It was a sandwich. 2 soft pieces of bread with a thick brown patty in the middle, grease pooling at the edges. Beside it, a pile of fried potatoes. And then the cook reached for a glass bottle, popped the cap with a practiced flick, and set it on the tray. The label was red and white, the letters curved and unfamiliar. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, and it fizzed. "Move," the cook said. Tanaka moved. He found a seat at the long wooden table and set the tray down carefully. Around him, other prisoners were staring at their food with the same paralyzed confusion. One man lifted the bottle to his nose and sniffed, then recoiled. Another picked up the sandwich with both hands, as though afraid it would dissolve. Tanaka brought the bottle to his lips. The first sip burned sweet and sharp and fizzing against his tongue like tiny explosions. He gasped, coughed, eyes watering. Across the table, another prisoner laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Someone else started crying. Tanaka bit into the sandwich. The bread was soft, pillowy, nothing like the hard rice cakes or stale biscuits he had eaten in the field. The meat was hot, fatty, rich, so rich it almost hurt. Grease ran down his chin. He chewed slowly, and with each bite, something inside him cracked. Not his will, not his loyalty. Something smaller and harder to name, the part of him that had prepared to die. He looked down at the tray. Half the sandwich remained, along with the potatoes and the bottle. He could not finish it. His stomach, shrunken from months of starvation, rebelled. But he could not stop eating either. He forced himself to take another bite, then another, tears sliding silently down his face. Fujimoto sat across from him, staring at his own tray. He had not touched the food. "It is poison," Fujimoto said quietly. "Or a trick. They want us weak." Tanaka swallowed. His throat ached. "If it is poison," he said, voice raw, "it is the kindest poison I have ever tasted." Fujimoto's jaw tightened. He picked up the sandwich, bit into it, and closed his eyes. His shoulders shook. The mess hall was full of men eating and weeping, the two acts tangled together, inseparable. The American guards stood along the walls, watching without expression. To them, this was routine. Tuesday breakfast, nothing special. They ate the same food, drank the same Coca-Cola, thought nothing of it. But for the prisoners, it was an attack. Not with fists or bullets, but with bread and meat and sweetness. It was harder to fight than cruelty. Cruelty made sense. Cruelty fit the story they had been told. But this times was something else. That night, back in the barracks, the arguments began. "They are weakening us," Fujimoto insisted, pacing in the narrow aisle between bunks. "They feed us well, so we forget our duty. So we grow soft and fat and stop thinking like soldiers." "Or," said a younger prisoner, a boy barely 20 with a bandaged hand, "they simply eat like this every day. Perhaps this is normal for them." Fujimoto stopped pacing. "Normal?" His voice shook. "You think it is normal times to feed prisoners better than free men? My family in Osaka eats boiled weeds. My children scrape bowls for grains of rice. And here, we are given meat and sugar and fizzing water like lords. How is that normal?" The boy lowered his eyes. "I do not know. No one did." The days fell into rhythm. Wake. Roll call. Work. Meals. Sleep. The work was steady but not brutal, shoveling snow, chopping wood, clearing roads. The guards were strict but not cruel. When one prisoner slipped on the ice and twisted his ankle, a guard helped him to the infirmary without a word. When another prisoner struggled to lift a heavy beam, an American soldier stepped in and lifted it with him, grunting in shared effort. These moments accumulated like snow, quiet and relentless. Tanaka was assigned to a work detail on a nearby farm. The farmer was an older man, thick-armed, with a face carved by wind and Sunday. He watched the prisoners with hard eyes, never speaking. One afternoon, as Tanaka bent to pick up a dropped tool, the farmer spat into the dirt near his feet. "Should have left you to rot," the farmer muttered. The guard escorting the detail said nothing. But he stepped closer, positioning himself between the farmer and the prisoners. The farmer turned and walked away. That night, Tanaka told the others what had happened. "See?" Fujimoto said. "They hate us. The kindness is a mask." "But the guard did not let him spit on us," the young prisoner countered. "He stood between. Because of rules," Fujimoto snapped, "not because he cares." "Perhaps," Tanaka said quietly. "But rules are something." The canteen became another source of confusion. Prisoners could exchange their small wages for items: soap, pencils, candy, cigarettes. Tanaka stood in line one afternoon and bought a chocolate bar. He held it in his hand, staring at the wrapper, unable to reconcile this object with the war he had lived through. Chocolate was medicine in Japan. Chocolate was precious, rationed, saved for the sick. Here, it was handed over for a few cents. He unwrapped it slowly and took a bite. The sweetness was almost violent. He ate half and saved the rest, wrapping it carefully in paper and tucking it under his pillow. That night, he dreamed of his daughter, and in the dream, he was handing her the chocolate. She smiled. When he woke, his face was wet. The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon in early spring. The snow had begun to melt, and the prisoners were allowed an hour of free time in the yard. Tanaka sat on a bench near the fence, watching the sky. It was blue, painfully blue, the kind of sky that made a man remember what freedom looked like. A group of American children appeared on the other side of the fence. They were curious, bold, faces flushed from running. One girl, maybe 8 years old, with blonde hair in braids, held a candy bar. She walked up to the fence and held it out. "Here," she said, smiling. Tanaka froze. He did not understand the word, but he understood the gesture. The girl pushed the candy bar through the wire. It fell into the dirt at his feet. For a long moment, Tanaka could not move. He stared at the candy, then at the girl, then back at the candy. His hands trembled. Slowly, he bent down, picked it up, and bowed deeply. "Thank you," he said in halting English, the words thick and clumsy in his mouth. The girl laughed, a bright, clear sound, and ran back to her friends. Tanaka stood there holding the candy bar, and something inside him broke. Not his loyalty, not his belief in the emperor, but the certainty that the enemy was faceless, that hatred was simple. That war made sense. He walked back to the barracks in silence. When Fujimoto asked what was wrong, Tanaka could not answer. He sat on his bunk and stared at the candy bar in his hands. That night, he told the others what had happened. "A child of the enemy gave me food," he said quietly. She smiled. Fujimoto shook his head. "It means nothing. A child does not understand war." "But I do," Tanaka said. "And that is why it means everything." The summer of 1945 arrived, and with it came rumors, whispers of bombings in Tokyo, losses in the Philippines. Then, in August, a word they did not understand. Asterisk. Atomic asterisk. The guards spoke in hushed tones. The Red Cross officials looked grim. And then the announcement came, delivered by an interpreter in the mess hall. Japan had surrendered. The room went silent. 37 men, forks halfway to mouths, frozen. One prisoner dropped his tray. The clatter was deafening. Tanaka sat very still. He felt nothing. Then he felt everything. Shame, relief, rage, grief, all of it at once, crashing over him like a wave. That night, no one spoke. They lay in their bunks, staring at the ceiling, and the silence was heavier than any sound. The repatriation process began in September. The prisoners were given clean uniforms, medical checkups, and travel documents. Tanaka packed his small bundle of belongings, a wooden carving he had made during idle hours, a few letters from home, and the chocolate bar from the girl. He had never opened it. On the morning they left, the prisoners filed through the camp gates one last time. Tanaka glanced back at the barracks, the mess hall, the fence. He did not feel fondness. He felt something stranger. Recognition. This place had not broken him with cruelty. It had broken him with bread. The journey home was long. On the ship, men huddled together, silent. When they finally stepped onto Japanese soil, the ruins stretched before them, bombed cities, shattered lives. Tanaka's wife met him at the gate, thinner than he remembered, but alive. She wept into his chest, and he held her, saying nothing. That night, she asked him what it had been like. He thought of the hamburger, the Coca-Cola, the girl with the candy bar. He thought of the guard who had stood between him and the farmer's spit. He thought of the chocolate bar still wrapped in paper, tucked in his bag. It was strange, he said finally. She waited for more, but he had no more words. Years later, when his daughter was old enough to ask, he tried again. I learned, he said slowly, that cruelty is easy to carry. You know what to do with it. But kindness stays with you. It changes shape. It asks questions you cannot answer. She did not understand, but she nodded. Tanaka never threw away the chocolate bar. He kept it in a drawer, wrapped in paper, a small relic of the war that made no sense. Sometimes, late at night, he would take it out and hold it in his hands, remembering the girl's smile. And he would think, asterisk. We were taught that the enemy was a monster, but monsters do not give candy to children. Monsters do not fold blankets. Monsters do not follow rules when no one is watching. Asterisk. War had stripped him of everything, his illusions, his certainties, his hunger. But it had left him with something harder to carry. The knowledge that even enemies can be human, and mercy, unlike hatred, cannot be erased by victory or defeat. It simply remains, quiet and persistent, long after the guns fall silent.